Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our second workshop in this series, Get Started with Google Analytics 4. Today is June 29th. You guys have 2 days until the migration deadline of July 1st. And so we have Nicole Rocchio here, who is our Insights lead at the Google News Initiative, and she will be walking through what you need to do before July 1st. And just so you guys know, the Google News Initiative is our partnership with the news industry. We work with the publishers and journalists to build a stronger news ecosystem to make quality information accessible to everyone. So these workshops are part of that work. And so we're super excited to be able to offer this to you today. So with that, I'll hand it off to Nicole, who will take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tina. Hi, everyone. We are so happy to have you back for the second session here in our 4-session part of migrating to Google Analytics 4. So thank you, everyone, last week for your questions and for your involvement. We really appreciated it. To give a little bit of an update as to what we'll be reviewing today and then for our next 2 sessions. Essentially, today we're going to, again, because as Tina previously just mentioned, we are 2 days, I believe, away from the migration. And so we're going to make sure everyone understands how to migrate over from Universal to GA4. And we're also going to review a little bit, which we'll discuss about audiences and then how to set up within your account. With our next series, our next webinar in the series on July 13th, we're going to be talking more about how to set up reports, how to look at reports, and also talk about exploration reports. And then our 4th and final, we'll be going over best practices, any other questions that you may have once you are starting to see all of your data flowing into your Google Analytics 4 account. But that's a little heads up as to kind of what will be coming. All right, so we're going to kind of talk about this in 3 categories: what you need to do, what's changing, and then we'll jump into our Q&A the same way that we did last week. So what is actually going to be changing? Oh, sorry. Wrong slide. This is the one that we wanted to start with. Okay, so what we used to measure. Again, when we were in Universal Analytics, the things that you really want to keep in mind or keep top of mind is that we have our total users that we used to measure in Google and in Universal Analytics. And we also used to measure something called goals. Moving forward, what we're actually going to be measuring now is active users. So essentially, Universal Analytics highlights total users, or which was shown as users in most reports. Whereas with GA4, it's going to be focusing more on active users, which is also shown as users. So while the term users kind of appears the same, the calculation for this metric is a little bit different between Universal Analytics and GA4, because UA is essentially showing you your total users and GA is showing active users. So depending on how frequently your users are returning to your website, that total users metric in Universal Analytics and the active users metric in GA4 may be more or less similar. So it's just something to kind of look out for. Now we're also talking about goals, which were now going to be our events or conversions. So essentially any goal that you had within Universal Analytics should now kind of be moving over to become conversion. When we're thinking about Universal and GA4, the difference between Universal and GA4, which we touched on a little bit last week, is essentially that event metric and how events are measured. So within GA4, everything is considered an event. A page view, I actually could list out everything, sessions, etc. Everything is now considered an event. And so the way that we want to think about this categorization when we're within our GA4 account is we're going to go to our events and mark the ones that are most meaningful or most important as conversions. And that's all something that you can do with kind of within your admin settings. And later we'll also be jumping into the UI so we can walk through a lot of the things that we walked through last week just to make sure we're all ready to go. And then again, just reviewing what else could be new or where you can find certain things within your setup assistant and admin. All right. So also, the one other thing I want to say is that when we're thinking about how you can have an option to get started with Google Analytics 4, if you didn't have the chance to watch our video last week, I highly recommend you kind of head over there to watch that for our setup. But there are a few different options that you can use for setting up your GA4 account. And so there's some, like you can use analytics data collection. So if you're just getting started with analytics now, you can put a GA4 tag onto your site to get started. And then with Google Analytics, another option with Google Analytics 4 is essentially adding that to a site with Universal Analytics already. And so that would be through the GA4 setup wizard. So we can also look at that in the UI. And then, of course, if you're working with a CMS, there is an option, or like a website building platform, there is going to be an option for you to kind of use that tag with your CMS in order to get everything set up. All right. So the new things that you can also kind of look for within GA4 that are really cool and I think bring a lot of functionality to this platform that was a lot different from Universal Analytics. You can search for insights. So essentially that search bar that we all know, both within Universal Analytics, is also within GA4, but now it's going to be much more useful. So if you were to type something in like, how many users did I have last month? Or how many, purchase events or purchase conversions did I have this week? Or where can I find X? I would highly recommend you try to lean on the functionality of the search bar just a little bit more than you did within Universal Analytics, because it can also direct you to certain reports that you could use to potentially figure out where was my highest referral traffic source, this week or something like that. And then it could also bring you straight to your acquisition traffic source report, which is really cool. All right, the second thing that is also interesting and new with GA4, and I definitely want to make sure we highlight, is that GA4 will now have machine learning insights incorporated within its platform. And so when you're in your GA4 account, what you'll see within your UI on your homepage, when you scroll down, there will be like an area for insights, and it'll have kind of like a little sparkle icon, it looks like. That is essentially indicative of when you have a machine learning insight. And as the account better understands all of the data within your publication and the users that are visiting your publication, it will not only surface machine learning insights that it thinks would be valuable to you, it will also do something similar with audience segment creation, which is also something that we'll touch on. All right. And one other thing that I think is super important to also note is that you can connect your data from Google Ad Manager to your Google Analytics account, as well as your Search Console. And this is something that we did not have the functionality of doing so before. And so this is for any users that have Google Analytics 4, if it is the free or the premium version, as well as with Ad Manager. All right, so now we are going to jump into just a few more things before we get straight to our Q&A, but we're going to quickly discuss the things that you need to make sure that you're doing before the deadline on Saturday. So you want to make sure you're creating those new properties, as I mentioned before. So you can either do it brand new, fresh to start, putting your GA4 tag on your website, or you want to make sure that you're using your GA4 setup assistant within the admin UI and make sure you're kind of like looking through all of the different things that the setup assistant is telling you to do. You want to make sure that you are creating events and conversions. And so we mentioned this a lot last week, but I know that this is a question that we also got a few, I guess, different ways of wording it, is kind of like what it would look like from Universal Analytics to GA4. And so you want to be able to create events and conversions within your GA4 account, because essentially the way that these events or conversions or goals were tracked within Universal Analytics, they're going to look a little bit different within your GA4 account. So although you will have kind of this GA4 account set up and you'll see data flowing in, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that you were measuring within Universal Analytics was ported over properly. So you definitely just want to make sure you're setting those up, making sure that you're creating them, etc. And then last but not least, but you want to make sure that your setup is essentially complete or marked complete through your setup assistant within GA4. There's a couple questions that come up around this as well. And so last week we were discussing what happens if you don't set anything up or if you're not touching your account, what happens? And there was a mention of kind of a break within your data. Let me clarify a couple things. So if you have a Universal Analytics account and you have the option to automatically create your GA4 setup turned on, your GA4 setup will be created for you if it has not yet been created by July 1st. What this means is essentially you'll have some of the automatically collected events that occur within GA4 being collected on your site. Nothing additional, though, will be collected. And so there are things that you'll need to actually double check are being collected properly, such as your events set up correctly, your conversions are marked and actually collecting data for you, because they're not just going to automatically have the exact same data because of these different data models. So that's what we kind of meant when there was like a break in data per se. But there will be an account that will start collecting your data as long as you haven't opted out for something to automatically be collected for you. One additional thought on that is within the tag assistant, in your universal or in your new GA4 setup, you'll say, like, let's set up my GA4 property. And then it'll ask you to go through everything with your GA4 setup assistant. When you're going through with your GA4 setup assistant, there are, and I'll show you this in the UI in a few moments, but there are different categories in which the setup assistant is telling you what it needs to do. And you can mark each of those things as complete when you're walking through that in your admin. The reason that it's important you mark these as complete is because if you don't mark them as complete, that will essentially trigger the GA4 platform to think that you haven't done any work on them, and then potentially import some, but not import all, because not all of your conversions and events are easily able to be imported. So it could be missing some. It might just create a little bit of a mess that could be cause for cleanup. I'm not saying this would definitely happen. I'm just saying it's one of the reasons that it could happen. And so I would highly recommend that you mark everything that is complete, so that there's nothing kind of ported over without your knowledge. And then you have to kind of sort through all of it to make sure that it makes sense. All right, so now that I have said all of that, we're actually going to head over to the UI and do a little bit of a walkthrough of the admin section and the GA4 setup assistant. All right, so just give me 1 second as I pull this up. All right. Okay, and I'm just going to adjust this a tiny bit. Perfect. Thank you so much, Tina. Awesome. Okay, so here we are within our GA4 setup. Again, as I mentioned last week, essentially, we don't have a test account that will kind of show you everything. So our account doesn't have any data in it, but the purpose of this exercise is to show you what happens if you have marketer or administrator access, which is what you'll need in order to make a lot of these changes within your new setup. And so we'll kind of walk through what the GA4 setup assistant looks like. But right now we're actually sitting within the universal analytics account. And I did unfortunately already dismiss that big countdown. If you see that countdown in your account, 1, it means you're within your universal analytics account. And 2, it means that your GA4 setup must not have been completed quite yet. So once we see that, we're actually going to go over here into the top right corner that says complete GA4 setup. And then what that will do is actually bring me to my setup assistant in now my GA4 account. So this should be your GA4 account. The way that you can easily tell the difference to know, am I in UA, am I in GA4, is over here on the left-hand side. The essentially like little bar that you'll have that pops out will look a lot different than your universal analytics account. So as we are in the setup assistant, just to kind of show you around what this looks like now, this is going to be the checklist of items that you have to work through before you can essentially say that you're ready and you're moved over fully from Universal Analytics to GA4. We'll just start at the top and then we'll kind of work our way through so you can have a pretty good understanding of everything that you need to make sure is covered before moving forward. So as we come down here, we have data collection, and this is where your web streams are going to exist. Now, the one really cool thing about GA4. This is something that we also talked a little bit about when we were kind of online together last week, is that GA4 now has the ability to track both app and web data streams. And so before it was only available, obviously, for our web. And so we now have this cross-domain and cross-platform tracking, which is new to the GA4 platform. And so when you're setting all of this up, you'll be able to come over here and set up your streams. And then once you set them up, you'll be able to see here iOS, Android, and then your web stream, which is the one that we have. And then once you do, you can actually click into this. And then what you can do here is look at your enhanced measurements, modify events, create custom events, and configure your tag settings. We'll talk a little bit about enhanced measurement in a moment, but I just wanted to show you that that's where you would be able to set up all of your data streams. When you're doing that after you're finished, then you'll be able to absolutely mark that as complete once you have your data stream set up. And then hopefully you'll see that bar change here at the top. As you scroll down a little bit, we talk about Google Signals. So Google Signals helps a lot with ads personalization. And if you want to look into this, you can click on Manage Google Signals and then mark as complete. Setting up conversions. I will show you that in one moment because we are also able to access it over here on the left-hand side. But once you are finished with setting up all of your conversions, definitely mark that as complete. There may be an option for you to import some of them over there. It might just be like existing here. I don't unfortunately have any data to show you from it, but there is an option to potentially import those conversion events over. If you want to, you can import them over, but then please review your data to make sure that it's accurate so that there isn't a large discrepancy in what you're looking at. And that would be under managing conversions as well, or it'll pop us over to the actual conversions tab if we click that. Defining audiences, we'll definitely take a look at this as well, but this is where you can look at audiences, but you can also import them from Universal Analytics. And so that's something that I would highly recommend taking a look at. But then again, making sure that all of the measurements that you had are equaling out or measuring the same way that you're expecting them to within GA4. Even just the simple metric of understanding that it will be active users instead of total users if you're using the metric of users. And then you'll mark as complete. Oh, and I guess if you already have it marked as complete, you can mark it as incomplete. And then down here, this is where you can link to Google Ads, conversions, and then target ads to GA4 audiences. So this is, again, if you're within Google Ads and you're working on something there, that's different than obviously our Google Ad Manager. And then this is an advanced setup, which is optional, but this is where you can manage the users that have access to your GA4 instance. And you can also manage this in property access management over here on the left-hand side. But essentially, anyone that you want to kind of be able to look at your data or work with your data, you can give them a specific type of access to your account, and you can find that right here. Importing data, and this is more from like data sources. This is not our universal analytics data into GA4. We did touch on this a little bit last week, but all of the data from universal analytics will need to be exported and saved elsewhere because it will not be imported into GA4. The reason that this is occurring is because, again, and I know I sound probably like a small bit of a broken record, but it's because the two data models are entirely different. And so you're not going to get a perfect one-to-one match on the metrics that and dimensions that you were looking at before. And then we have our link to BigQuery if that's something that you're going to be using to export your data. And then setting up user ID or signals. And this helps for more like cross-platform analysis or cross-device tracking. So if someone were to look at your website on their phone and then kind of change over and look at your website on their desktop, that's cross-device reporting. And then cross-platform is if you as a news publisher have an app and a user logs into your app and then comes over to, let's say, desktop to view your website, you'll be able to kind of see where those users are and work on that with reporting. As we scroll back up to the top, we will essentially then come over here to the left-hand side on this column and look at property settings. And I think that I believe that, okay, here we go. There was just a little issue there. Okay, so what you're going to look at here is you're going to look at the property name, and then you'll look at the industry category. Definitely make sure that you're marking this as news. In the future, there could be any addition to, I guess you could say, industry category segmentation for audiences, or even the machine learning insights that are populated within your account. So just make sure you have the proper industry category selected. And then, of course, your time zone and your currency needs to be selected as well. Then property access management, again, that's who has access to your account. Then data streams, we're going to look at this for 1 second so that I can show you a little bit more about your enhanced measurements. So there are 4 different types of events that are available. And essentially, they are automatically collected / enhanced measurement. And then there is recommended events and custom events. So for enhanced measurement, these are all of the different types of enhanced measurements that you have available to collect on your property. I would recommend turning all of them on so that you have as much data as you need. And then, of course, if something is really not anything that you're working on, such as like video engagement, or you have no forms such as that, then of course, like, don't feel the need to turn them on. But this is so easy to toggle on and off to collect this data. And you want to make sure that you have everything kind of setting up and flowing correctly. Now, we can also modify events here, or we can modify it over in the left-hand side over here, right underneath where data streams is. But I wanted to quickly also show you a little bit about configuring your tag settings. And so if we click into this, this will show you like if your tag is connected or if it's set up properly. There should be almost a green check here. Again, we have no data in this account, but that is where you would kind of see whether or not that tag is set up properly. And then you can manage the automatic event detection. And that's what we were looking at. And then you can configure your domains. So if you wanted to add a condition on this, and then user provided data capabilities here. And then installation instructions. One more thing to quickly show you. So I know earlier I had mentioned if you're working with a website builder or CMS, and then what you'd be able to do is type in what your actual URL is to see whether or not you have something that would pop up for a connection, because it doesn't, of course, connect to every single CMS that's out there. There are some, though, that are more popular and that we're able to connect easily. If you're installing this code manually, this is what you would copy and paste into the header of every page on your site. We get a lot of questions around, like my data doesn't look correct, or there's a discrepancy within my data. One of the things that I always talk about when it comes to this is there are a few different things that you want to check. One, you want to check how the metrics could potentially be different, see if that's one of the reasons. And then also another thing that you really want to make sure you're checking and making sure is correct is going and ensuring that the tag for your GA4 property is firing correctly on all pages. That's also another way that I would double check everything is working as intended. Now, if you're trying to say, okay, Nicole, I'm going to go to my page, I'm going to create an event or do some sort of type of conversion to then make sure it's working correctly. Like, how do I see that? Where do I go? And one of the things that I will say is it'll be either within your Google Tag Manager, it'll let you know if the tag is set up properly, or you can go to two things within the GA4 UI. One is called Debug View, which is actually right here. So it's in this left-hand side. It's called Debug View. And if there were events happening on your site, they would actually just be happening and appearing right here. And it'll honestly go down by time. And I know this is a smaller screen, so bear with me, or smaller font. But this is just the time that's happening at each interval for the events that you may have. And then it'll have like your top events over here on the right-hand side. Talking about events, there are no events in this account, but if you wanted to create an event, this is where you would be able to do so. And so last week we talked a little bit about creating events and making sure that you can tag, let's say if you have a subscription on your website, being able to tag whether or not someone has subscribed to your account. Now you can have a custom event name here, and it could be, begin checkout or something for your subscription. And then the event name equals, let's say subscribe or new subscriber, maybe. Anyway, you always want to make sure that when you're using spaces that you're using an underscore. That's how you'll kind of like do a lot of this naming. And once you have that, you can also add a condition where you can add another parameter that says like event name equals, or you can even say, I think what we did last week was, which one did we use? Page location equals, and then it would be a URL. So if you're manually tagging that, that's kind of also, let's say you have a begin checkout URL, or let's say like a thank you page. This is where you could add that URL to make sure you're tagging that event correctly. You can also add modifications or modify the parameters that you're using. So essentially, if you're going to be tagging more manually speaking, you'll have to update your code a lot when you're adding events or some conversions. And that's something that if you wanted to install Google Tag Manager, you would be able to do a lot of your tagging within Google Tag Manager and no adjustment to the code would be needed. And also, if you're doing this more manually, all of the events or conversions that you will be tagging for your website would need to almost be like a modification to a specific parameter or event that was already collected. So you have to kind of like tag them onto one another if you're going to do it more manually. And we can always add some more information on that if you need in the comments, but definitely let us know in the Q&A, which I believe is definitely open for everyone to start submitting questions if you have them as we're kind of going along here. But we'll jump into the Q&A very shortly. Once we have our events, then you also have conversions. And so one thing here that I'm actually thinking I can show you really quickly is once you have an event created, you'll be able to mark something as a conversion. And so this is grayed out here, but everyone will actually, fun fact, have purchase set up as a conversion event within their account. And it will be marked as a conversion to start if it's going to be automatically collected. And so when you're looking at what events you want to tag as conversions, what I would recommend is that you think about the ones that are most important to your business and that signal something that you want to take measure of, and then use that as your conversion event. And so the one thing that I can quickly show you, although I don't have proper access to the Google demo account, if you want to kind of see what different data could look like, you can essentially, anyone can use the GA4 Google Merch Shop as a like a demo account, which is now what we're looking at. But I wanted to be able to show you something that has a little bit more data within its account. And so these are all of the different events that the Google Merchandising Store is collecting. Now, again, because we don't have proper access or admin access to the Google Merch Store, all of these conversions here, it's a very light distinction, but you can see some of them that are like toggled on for a conversion versus those that are not. And then when they are, and you click into your conversions on the left-hand side, right underneath events within admin, you'll be able to then see all of the conversion events. And then you'll see the event count or the conversion event count. And then the percentage of change, just so that you know what that means. There's usually a box right here in the top right corner showing you the time frame that it's measuring and then compared to the time frame right before that. So we're measuring the last 28 days. And then it's comparing it to the last 28 days before the 28 days that we're viewing. All right. And then I think if we hop back over to this tab instead, just to quickly show you audiences. Okay, so I wanted to show you how to create audiences. So we have some here already. But one of the audiences that is really useful for publishers is within our news consumer insights tool, we actually have an audience called brand lovers. And this will actually need to be set up in order to use within our new version of our tool, which is ready to be used with GA4. So what you would do is you would name your audience up here. So we're going to say brand lovers. And then what you would do is you're going to add session number as a dimension. You would add a filter. So we're going to do greater than or equal to 15. And then hit apply. And that's honestly as simple as it will be. Typically, what happens is in this summary here, it will show you how many users that it would bring up as that audience category if you were to create it, which is fantastic. But that is essentially how you would create brand lovers. Session number greater than or equal to 15. And then all you do is click save. The one thing that I will say is this, we also walk you through this step-by-step within our News Consumer Insights tool. And so if you have any questions about all of that, that would be great. Oh, and then you should also probably add a description because I did not do that. Oh, and then once you click on this, it'll actually bring you to a report that kind of shows you exactly what this segment of users looks like, which I think is really, really useful. And I've gotten this question from a lot of publishers before of like, if I have this type of audience, how can I look at it? How do I measure it? And so that's how you would do that. The one other thing that I do want to talk about, I believe we'll actually have some Q&A that reviews this as well. And so we can also kind of maybe jump into the Q&A to start. But I know that we had a couple questions about data retention last week. And so within your data settings in your account, you'll open that up and you'll click on data retention and you'll change that from 2 months to 14 months and then hit save, just so that you have your data retaining over a longer period of time. And And that's really important. The last thing that I will say before I definitely jump over to our Q&A here is we have the product links over here on the left-hand side. So your ad manager link, and then where that would go, it's because I don't have my ad manager linked here, but this is where you would have your link. You'll do that within your ad manager account. And then of course, if you have Search Console and BigQuery or anything else that you would want to connect, that's where you can find it. I'm going to quickly show you the demo site's homepage so that you have a good understanding of where you can find certain things. And then I'll just like briefly show you what the tabs look like. But then in our next session, that's when we'll kind of do more of a deep dive of walking through everything and configuring reports or explorations. And so this is what the home screen would look like when you have your data rolling through. You'll be able to see conversions, users, new users, event count, and you can switch these to see different things if you wanted to. And then that number will change. You have the ability to change the date frame here. So you could say the last 7 days. The one thing I will say for this is that when you change it up here, it'll also typically change it for these graphs down here. And so we have this conversions, users, new users, and engaged sessions. And then we also have users in the last 30 minutes. You'll see at the bottom of each of these little screenshot cards, essentially like you can go and view the report snapshot, or you can go and view it in real time. And if you were to go and click on this, it will actually then bring you to, if you were to go into the reports tab here, into the report overview. And then for real time, it'll go into the real time report that we have. These are your recently accessed. These are suggested for you. So different things that they think could be useful, because I don't have the correct like insights. This is where the machine learning insights would appear within your account, which is really cool. So you'll get to see the way that it's kind of analyzing and looking at your data and then suggesting certain things to you based off of what your data looks like. Again, this is looking at different things. So this is event count, total users, or event count per user, where your users are coming in from. And this is user acquisition. And so again, you can click on this little link down here in the bottom right-hand corner, and that will open the report up for you. You have event count by event name. Also, as we're going through all of these, if you ever have questions or you're not entirely certain what that actual metric means or how it's measured and it's underlined, you can actually just like hover over it and it'll give you a little description or definition. And then you can also click this and it'll bring you out to a Google Analytics Help Center article, which they are filled with a lot of really, really good information if you're figuring out anything with GA4. Also, the other cool thing that I think is nice is you can either leave positive or negative feedback if this specific card that was suggested for you in particular was actually helpful for you. The other thing that I wanted to quickly note is if you have the insights or the machine learning insights, anytime you see the little like sparkle, I don't know what to call this, essentially over here, it will show you what your insights would be or what they could be if you're looking for something more particular or easy. And so like on what days did I get the most users? How many new users this year? All of these different types of insights, you can ask the analytics intelligence. Or again, when I was telling you a little bit earlier about searching or like how many users did we get last week on mobile? There you go. Of course, there's an extent to which this probably is going to be useful for you. But I think the one cool thing about this is that if you're in a meeting or you're kind of trying to report on something really quickly, you can use that search bar to try and do it for you. And then these are going to be your reports. We're not going to go in depth on this. I'm just going to quick show you what the tab looks like. But this will be your report snapshot where your real time is, your life cycle, acquisition, engagement, monetization, and retention. And so these all open up into other types of reports that you can look at. And then you also have reports on user attributes and tech. So like mobile, desktop, app. This is going to be your Explore tab. And so this is where you'll find all of your raw unfiltered data here. And then if you have anything for advertising, this will be where your advertising snapshot is created as well. All right. I think now that I will bring Tina back in so we can get started on our Q&A, and hopefully we have some questions rolling in. Tina, let's get started on our Q&A.
Yeah, perfect. We have plenty of questions that have rolled in. So
Awesome.
we'll take the top three first, and then we'll go through all of the YouTube chats as well as things that are on Gather, and we'll try to cover as much as we can within the hour. So very exciting announcement this week is AMP supported.
I'm so glad that you brought this up. Okay, great news. This is huge. AMP earlier this week, I believe it was on Tuesday, but don't quote me on that, essentially launched basically saying that we are now going to be essentially compatible with GA4. So we have a help center article that details out all of this information on what to do if you have AMP pages and you need to use them within GA4. And we'll make sure to include that within the comments below. But that's really exciting. And I think if you were to Google probably like AMP and GA4, that page would pop up for you.
Fabulous. So the migration deadline is July 1st, but when do I need to export my data by?
Another good thing to talk about. So we originally had our timeline for exporting our data was going to be 6 months. So it was going to be at the end of this year that you had to kind of finish all of your data exporting. But we've extended that deadline. So now the new deadline to export all of your data will be July of 2024. What I would probably recommend is you focus on making sure everything is set up well within your account, make sure things are running appropriately, get all of your tags set up, your events, conversions, audiences, and then worry about exporting your data somewhere.
Great. And then lastly, what is a data threshold?
Okay, so we talked a lot about the data thresholds, or we got a lot of questions about this last week. So to confirm, there's something called data thresholding, and then there's also something called data sampling. Now, both of these are available to see within your UI if they're happening. It will be within your graph. It'll be like almost in the top right-hand corner, and it'll have like a little like caution triangle in a way. And this could also be on your reports even. And what this means is with data thresholding in particular, essentially the GA4 platform was created with user privacy in mind. So this is created to make sure that we're protecting all of users' data. If we do not have enough data to not expose more of this specific user's data, we'll actually have to threshold this data so that we're not revealing anything and we're staying compliant with all of our privacy regulations. That is data thresholding. But another thing that you could see is also data sampling. And so data sampling is actually just when you have hit potentially the limits within your account and we're still trying to help you report on things so that it looks accurate. You'll essentially see a little like triangle or like warning sign that says like data sampling. And what data sampling is going to essentially do is like behind the scenes, the exploration and funnel reports are loading a lot of like raw data or user level data without relying on like the pre-processed database tables for what we would find in reports, let's say. So by using this raw event and user level data and information, they're able to surface like more detailed results, but it could take some more time to load. So essentially like analytics is using data sampling when the number of events returned by your exploration or your funnel report within explorations exceeds that limit for your property. So it essentially allows you to kind of like look through all of that data at a high level using more of like a representative sample of your data. And then it'll kind of like scale up to provide more like directionally accurate results or insights, if that makes sense.
No, super helpful. We got a couple of questions about this of folks that have differences in page views or users or just data in general from Universal to GA. So could you give us a little bit more information on that?
Yeah. So with page views, there is something within GA4 that could potentially like cause some confusion of like views. And so if you're working within a web stream or an app stream, this will look a little bit different. So views in general will include all of your data streams. Whereas if you're looking at page views, that'll include your web stream. So just keep those in mind. And that could potentially be one of the reasons that there's like a difference in those numbers. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but the other thing that you want to think about is like if there's a discrepancy in some of the data that you're seeing, again, remember that it's not going to be a perfect one-to-one match. And there could be some discrepancy in the way that users are visiting your site. And so within Universal Analytics, if you were completing a conversion, it would mark that as one user, one conversion. And then if that same user was doing another or completed another conversion, it would mark it as another user and another conversion. Whereas within GA4, it'll mark it as one user, two conversions. And so that could also cause some discrepancy. Hopefully that answers it all. But Tina, let me know if I didn't.
Super helpful. Yeah, and if you guys have any other questions or if you want us to expand a little bit more, if you're on Gather and you're not seeing the Q&A section, feel free to just refresh the page and there should be a blue button that says Ask a Question. If you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to leave in the chat. We're getting a lot of questions, so trying to get through as many as we can. And I think this one actually is probably one of a really helpful one. We got a question around, is there a list of recommended custom events and audiences that news publishers should set up? But we got another question that was, can I create a custom definition or event to gather the publish date, category, and author name of an article? And we had another question as well about creating an audience for like a specific author. So to answer the first question around what kind of recommended custom events you can set up, this is a really great example based on publish date, category, author name. But I was wondering, Nicole, if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, honestly, Tina, you already kind of started to answer it. And so these are all metrics that we're going to be able to figure out how to tag. The one thing that I will say is that we haven't created necessarily like a specific list for news publishers today, although, and not to like make you come back to our next webinar, but if you come back to our next webinar, what we'll actually be discussing more of is creating specific like reports or like talking about more specific events that you can measure to kind of uncover more for news publishers, of course. And so I would say that I would say just come back to our third webinar and we'll discuss a little bit more specifically about like when you're looking at your reports, what are the things that we definitely want to measure? And then how could we measure some of those? And based off of the questions that I have today, I would be happy to kind of like walk us through how to maybe do some of that. The one other thing that I will say though, is that if you're using Google Tag Manager, that's where a lot of this can potentially be set up. And if you're not, that's also really good for us to know so that we can kind of like better answer some of those questions. But for those that have these questions, if they are also posted in that Q&A underneath this video, I'll add a couple links in that can give some guidance until our next webinar series.
Great. All right. I don't know if Nicole, do you want to show your screen just to like if you were to create for any one of these?
Yes. And let me share this tab. Okay, Tina, you could maybe share my screen.
Yep.
All right, so we're talking about a custom definition. Okay, so I'll show you where you can find a lot of these things so that if you need to set up any of this, you can. So within your setup assistant, we'll go down here. And so I'm going back to this. How can I create a custom definition or event to gather the publish date, category, and author name? So just so that we can show here, we'll go into custom definitions. And so what I would say for now is like, this is where you can find it and this is where you can set it up. And I'm happy to kind of like also send you the link so that it can walk step by step through it. But because I don't have a lot of data in this account, unfortunately, I can only like go so far. And so what I'll do is I'll answer that question with like a more specific, like step by step, perhaps, if that will be useful. But this is where you can find it to get started. And then we'll walk through the rest in the Q&A comments.
Perfect. Another question, does audiences replace segments?
Okay, good question. So the one thing that I will say is with segments, that is something that can only be used in explorations at the moment. Audiences can be used in comparisons as one of the conditions in a standard report. So let me look and show you actually. And I think, Tina, could you share my screen again by chance? Awesome. So if you're in your reports, and I know that this is going into a little bit more in depth, and we'll kind of walk through this again next week, but just so that I can quickly show you how to like maybe look at some of this, is that if you add a comparison right here, you can include dimensions. So if you have a data stream, okay, well, it should appear there if you had more than one data stream, but essentially you can include a dimension of like another data stream or a stream name. And maybe that's what it is actually, stream name. Yeah, stream name. And then you can actually select which stream name is yours if you wanted to like maybe look at two different streams. But this can also be done with like different types of categories if you're looking to segment out a comparison within just your report functions. And then of course, if you're going over to your explorations, that's where you can use your segments. And that would be here if we go into explorations. And then if you were to create a free form exploration, and there are certain things that you can use within certain explorations. But down here is essentially like where you would be able to drop or select a dimension or metric. And this is where you could add your segment if you have an additional segment. And this is where you would be able to either see the segment you've already created or create a custom segment for users or events or session. And so if we were to click on, let's just say, this one, it'll essentially like open it up so that you can then create that segment to use to measure. And then these are some templates, of course, that you could always look at. And then the predictive, I discussed this like a little bit earlier, but once you have data flowing into your account, this is where you could actually use like a predictive reference for your new segment if you wanted to use that within your Explorer. And this would be based off of the data that is specific to your account. I hope that helps like walk through a little bit about how you can find more of that information.
Great. All right. We have one question around, can you import GA4 data into Google Sheets?
Google Sheets?
Yes.
Awesome. So the one thing that I will say about that is also if you're using the Explore function, within the Explore function, you will be able to at the top, actually, Tina, if you want to show my screen again, I keep like switching back and forth between these. Okay, so we're still in Explore over here in the top like right corner. And I know that this is super small, so bear with me, but it's right next to like where you could also share that Explore report with somebody else. But that's where you would be able to export it to a Google Sheet. Now, not all Explore reports have the ability to export to Google Sheets. I will say that. Like I know Path Exploration may not be able to, but with your freeform reports, they can. So that's where you can use that for sure.
Great. We're getting a couple more questions just on tagging in general. I'll leave the screen up because I don't know if this might be relevant, but in case it is, but generally questions around the AMP integration. So can GA4 be integrated into AMP via Google Tag Manager?
So let me see if I can find this one thing here. Hold on. I do know that I have something up for this. Where is it? Sorry, I have too many pages open.
No rush.
Alrighty, 1 second. And this is brand new too, so I'm also learning a little bit about the AMP integration as you are. And so essentially it will... All right, so it says that the AMP is going to be an open source page format for the mobile web. And they're similar to the HTML pages and will load in any browser. However, you cannot use gtag.js on accelerated mobile pages or AMP. And so a different analytics tag is provided specifically for AMP. And this will also be, I'll post this exact Help Center article in our comments so that you can read through all of this when you need to go through it. But that is essentially like what you can look through for that. And I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I promise that that Help Center article has a lot more info than I do. But I would look at that first.
Great, amazing. And I just want to answer, like, we've been getting a couple of questions around like when we're going to roll features out or things like that. We are not the Google Analytics 4 team. We're the Google News Initiative. So we're just here to kind of walk through the different changes. We don't work on the product directly. We can surface feedback to the team. But just want to clarify that because in case there's any struggles you guys are having with certain parts of the tool, we don't actually own any of the features.
That's a really good reminder from you, Tina. Also, I think if it would be helpful for everyone, I'm happy to post the updated, like what is rolling out for Google Analytics. And so there's essentially like a reference sheet and it gives you kind of like every week or so, they'll kind of like update that with the new things that they've added to Google Analytics for. And I'm happy to share that with everyone so that if you ever wanted to look at that, you can kind of keep up with everything that they're launching.
Great. Yeah. And if there's any questions that we don't fully cover in this chat, we'll definitely reply to them on the Gather page. So again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to leave them there. One question around, again, more tagging questions. If I have UA event tags set up in GTM from before the GA4 transition, should I recreate them in GTM or in GA or not at all?
That's a great question. Okay, so essentially, if you have them already set up for event tags, you should be able to transition some of your event tags over. My recommendation is to retag in the GA4 instance, mostly just based off of like the metrics and dimensions and them being a bit different. I do recognize we are 2 days before the deadline, and so some things might not be super feasible. You can always import them over and then see how well they're tagging or like the data, just to like double check what they're calling as the metrics and the dimensions. And of course, you could always delete and then recreate certain things. But my personal recommendation would be to recreate them yourself in GA4 if you can, because you'll know that they're going to be more accurate and collecting the data that you're looking for.
Great. And kind of more generally, how do I add the GA4 tag via Google Tag Manager?
Yes. So another thing, I am not on the Google Tag Manager team, nor am I a full wizard yet on Google Tag Manager, but I do know that you can access the Google Tag Manager or your account through the analytics user interface. And so essentially, once you do that, you'll be able to open up your account if you have a Google Tag. And if not, you're able to add an account or create a new account. And I think I should actually be able to potentially try and show this to you. But once you're actually like within that space, you should have the ability to look at how to create an account for the Google Tag Manager. And then you can kind of like access everything there and create a lot of things within that space. And then the great thing about that is if you're adding and uploading all of your event tags and all of that stuff to that space, you won't need to worry about any of the tags that are hard coded onto your page. And so I think if we go into here, learn more, let me see if this opens it up. Okay, it doesn't. I mean, like it opened up into this tag, which is a Help Center article about how to set up Google Tag Manager, which I can also, I'm happy to share with you. I think within your Universal Analytics account, there is a chance in which you could actually just go straight. Oh, wait. Never mind. Hold on here. I'm going to show this tab again. Okay, so within this configuration, if you're actually up here at the top, there's configuration history and then admin. If you go into Google Tag Management here, you'll be able to say like install this Google Tag, manage the Google Tag, combine tags, and then see the Google tags that you have access to with Google Tag Manager. And then you can learn more about like your actual Google Tag Manager account there. Or you can do like install this Google Tag, which will bring you to the similar page that I shared with you before. But this is where you can like figure out everything kind of like Google Tag oriented and then go from there.
Great. Still getting a lot of questions about differences in users and page views. So for example, we have one publisher who's saying any possible reason why total users and active users are low on a GA property that handles multiple subdomains. I know that is not specifically due to the fact that it's multiple subdomains, but maybe Nicole, if you can tell us a little bit more again of like what the differences between Universal and GA4 are and why there are differences in the users.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a question that has come up a decent amount. And I think that one of the things that we kind of like were talking about earlier was the difference between total and active and all of that. And so I would say that the two models are inherently different. And I have heard from publishers that there's a 30% discrepancy. I have heard that there's 20%. I've heard there's 10%. And so I think that what you need to do as a publisher is make sure that the tag is set up correctly. And then once you can ensure that your tag is set up correctly, you can better understand how the data models are going to show your data in a different way. That might not be the absolute best answer, but I don't believe that there's anything that you may be like missing from page users. It's just that maybe your active users look a little bit different than your total users, because, you know, that was from Universal Analytics. And now we're looking at active users within GA4. And so that might just be a tiny bit different based off of what those two definitions of the metrics are. And then from there, once you can better understand that, I also think that and maybe this is my take on it, but I also think it's good to know that it's not only you as a publisher that is experiencing kind of like the change in the data models, it's going to be everyone else as well. And so I think that it's definitely like worth figuring out how those two data models look different with your data, and then just making sure you're actually seeing all things come in properly. And if at the moment you have your universal set up and it's still collecting data, and you have your GA4 set up and it's collecting data, one of the things that I would recommend doing is looking at the conversions and goals and comparing those to see how they're coming in, because goals is essentially what you were looking at within Universal and conversions is what you're looking at in GA4. And so let's look at that first, and then use your debug view in GA4, which is, just to remind everyone where that is, debug view is down here in your admin. And what debug view looks like, and I'm actually going to see if I can show you what debug view looks like within the merch shop so that you can see what potentially like maybe some more events look like. So within debug view, you can see whether or not your events are coming in the way that they're meant to. So as I'm scrolling down here, I see like first or view item list and page view and view item list again and page view again, session start. And you'll be able to see kind of like the top events that have happened in the last 30 minutes within your account within debug view. And then once you can better understand that, you can look at your real-time report within Universal Analytics and see if those are like measuring up. And then if there is a discrepancy between those two like data models, I would make sure that the discrepancy isn't based off of like the new way that GA4 is counting some of those metrics, such as views or users. Hopefully that answers it, but I know that there's going to be probably more questions on this. That's the best I can do for right now.
Perfect. And we can, again, we'll share all of the resources that Nicole's mentioned in the chat as well. We'll reply to those comments. So things like how to set up the events, the specific ones around for news publishers like the author or things like that. We'll make sure that those instructions are included. And we'll also include that update list that Nicole was telling us about that will tell us about all of the different features on GA4. We're almost at time, so we'll take just one or two more questions here. This one, I heard that GA4 automatically counts clicks on external links. Where in GA4 can I find out how many times a particular link on a particular page has been clicked?
Yes. So within your setup assistant or data stream, actually, and then you go into your data stream and it will show you your enhanced measurements. Oh, this is the Google account. So there's outbound clicks. So that's something that is measured through your enhanced measurements. And this is something that you can find within your report section. Let's do events. And you'll be able to kind of look at all of the different events that are here. And so let's see if we can change click, if that's one of the clicks that you're looking at. I don't know if I'm fully understanding that question, but I think that that should be something that you can look at for your clicks. And then if there's something particular, I'm sure you can add UTM parameters for that so that you can like kind of check that in that one in particular.
Yeah, May, let us know if that answers your question. Otherwise, you can always reply to the comment and we can answer it.
Yes, and like add more data if I missed anything, and I'm happy to kind of like send in a different answer.
Yeah, no worries. All right, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we are at time, but any of the comments that are on the page, we will respond to by the end of the day. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And don't forget, we are doing 2 more sessions on GA4. We got a lot of questions around reports and event tagging, so we'll definitely cover that in our future session. That'll be on July 13th. So we hope you have a lovely July 4th holiday if you're in the US. So take a little break from GA4 after the migration, and we'll talk about how to set up reporting as well as best practices on July 20th. So hope to see you guys soon. And thank you guys again for joining us.
Thank you both, or thank you all, sorry, so much for joining today. Again, I know it's a lot to listen to and for us to go through and digest, but please know that we're here to try and help as much as we can, or at least the best that we can without actually being the GA4 team. But please, if you're looking also for anything that you would like for us to cover in our next session, feel free to include that in a comment on this page as well, and we'll take note of it and incorporate it into the next session if it is something that is really applicable for all of our watchers. But thank you all so much again for your time.